Well, good morning and welcome to CBS News Mornings. It is almost 7 o'clock here in New York City. I'm Anne-Marie Green, and here's a look at the stories grabbing our attention right now. Ukraine has rejected Russia's demand to surrender the port city of Mariupol and is now accusing Moscow of holding remaining residents hostage. We're going to have updates from Ukraine and the White House. Plus, we have new details on the search for several suspects connected to a deadly weekend shooting in Arkansas. At least one person was killed and dozens more injured, including children. And Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas remains hospitalized with flu-like symptoms this morning. We're going to take a look at what that means for upcoming cases and the first day of nomination hearings for Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson. And if you weren't already following March Madness basketball, the continued Cinderella performances from the St. Peter's Peacocks may change your mind. We are breaking down the rest of the wild weekend upsets ahead. And later, we're hearing directly from real estate analysts about why a construction slowdown has only added to a quick rise in rent prices across the country.
So how big is the rental shortage in the United States?
The government has estimated that we are short about 4 million homes in this country, and that number is likely growing, especially since the pandemic.
We're going to take a closer look at rising rents and mortgages as the housing crisis escalates nationwide. But first, we're following some breaking news right now out of southern China, where a plane carrying 132 people crashed into a mountainside. The China Eastern Boeing 737 was traveling from a western province to the East Coast region earlier today when it plunged to the ground, sparking a massive fire. Now, it's unclear just what caused the crash and how many people were potentially killed or injured. Stay with us, though, throughout the day for all the latest developments on this story. Well, President Biden will hold a high-stakes phone call with allies this morning ahead of his trip to Brussels and Warsaw later on this week. They'll discuss the war in Ukraine as Russia intensifies airstrikes across major cities. Elise Preston has more.
Ukrainian officials rejected a Russian demand to surrender the port city of Mariupol by early this morning. Residents there have faced some of the harshest attacks by Russian forces.
What happens in Mariupol is an epitome of war crime. Instead of simply opening a humanitarian corridors as we agreed and letting people out and letting supplies in, Russians are just trying to take the city down.
Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin says the invasion has stalled and believes Russian President Vladimir Putin will escalate his attacks to build momentum.
We've seen him attack towns and cities and civilians outright. We expect to see that continue.
This video shows a large blast in the suburbs of Kyiv. Firefighters pulling someone from the rubble.
There is just 1% chance for us to stop this war.
Speaking to CNN, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says he's willing to negotiate with Putin, but rejected a proposal to recognize separatist regions.
You cannot force people to love the enemy. That's impossible.
Zelensky released this video showing the destruction of his country.
This was my home.
But vowed to rebuild.
It will become great.
Later this week, President Biden meets with NATO allies in Brussels and on Friday goes to Poland to discuss the humanitarian crisis.
A major investigation is underway in Arkansas after police say a gunfight left one person dead and dozens injured over the weekend. It happened at a car show sponsored by a nonprofit group in the town of Dumas. Authorities say that two people started shooting at each other, injuring at least 28 people, including young children. One man is now in custody, but police are still searching for another suspect allegedly involved. And a manhunt is underway in Virginia for the suspects accused of shooting and killing two people, including a local newspaper reporter. Family and friends held a vigil for Sierra Jenkins yesterday. The 25-year-old was caught in the crossfire after shots were fired outside a restaurant in Norfolk early Saturday. Now, another person also died. Jenkins was actually scheduled to cover breaking news for the Virginia Pilot that day. However, when her editor called her to investigate that shooting, she couldn't be reached. Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas is expected to be released from the hospital in the coming days after battling an infection. The 73-year-old was admitted on Friday in Washington, D.C. with flu-like symptoms. A court spokesperson tells CBS News that Thomas's condition is not COVID-related, and he is expected to miss some oral arguments this week, but will be able to participate by listening to transcripts. Meanwhile, Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson's Supreme Court nomination hearing begins today. Nicole Killian is going to be joining me with a preview coming up at around 7:15, and we'll have extensive coverage all week long, including a live streaming of the hearing starting this morning at 11 a.m. Eastern on CBSNews.com/hearing. March Madness is living up to its name with a major upset across the tournament. 15-seeded St. Peter's will continue its Storybrooke run after knocking off 7th-ranked Murray State. Meanwhile, number 10 Miami upset 2nd-ranked Auburn to make their 4th Sweet 16 in the university's history. The next round of action begins Thursday. Russia has escalated its attacks on key Ukrainian cities. A missile hit a shopping mall in Kyiv overnight as the port city of Mariupol refuses to surrender. So we will have all the latest developments from the battlefield coming up next. And still ahead, historic nomination hearings will soon be underway on Capitol Hill, where President Biden's Supreme Court Justice pick Ketanji Brown Jackson faces the Senate Judiciary Committee. Nicole Killian joins me after the break with more on what to expect. But first, it is 7:06 on the East Coast. At the bottom of the hour, we will check in with Weather Channel's Jim Cantori. But until then, here's a look at your local weather.
When these Holocaust survivors are gone, who will warn us to never forget? When some people don't know. Undeniable. The Truth to Remember. Streaming now.
An original CBS Reports documentary.
Some Republicans are now accusing companies like Twitter and Facebook of targeting conservatives.
They've had unchecked power to censor.
I do not have access to my main Facebook account.
I wasn't given an explanation. I was just like, what did I do?
It's not okay to shut down my voice simply because it's not the same as yours.
How those rules are enforced is something that the rest of us know very, very little about.
The First Amendment protects all of us from the government limiting our speech. The companies have the ability to decide what speech they will allow. They're not the government.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now. An original CBS Reports documentary.
Oh my God, the truck is sinking.
Devastating flooding has reached catastrophic levels.
Rising sea levels are threatening America's coasts.
You would have to take that house and put it on stilts 10 feet tall. If the street is filled with salt water, what difference does it make how high you make your house?
The highest rental rates is exactly where the elevation is highest.
This was the evidence to prove that climate gentrification was real.
Pay $1,800 in 5 days or you have to leave. Were you scared?
Yes.
Every single person who stood up and said, I am not paying this rent increase, received an eviction.
Haitians built this place and you're getting kicked out.
Yes.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now.
We have an inspiring story that started with a strange act of kindness.
Yeah. We found it.
You're kidding me! We share stories that lift you up and brighten your day.
The Uplift. Stream on the free CBS News app.
An original CBS Reports documentary.
The COVID economic shutdown hit Las Vegas harder than any other major city in the nation.
It's decimated the entertainment community.
So even though it looks fairly busy, this is really just a fraction of what business was like prior to COVID.
Last week, there was another large hotel chain that 18,000 were let go.
I haven't seen any jobs that are even close to what I was making.
We're trying to keep things as normal for our kids. I have a 16-year-old daughter and a 12-year-old son.
And I see every day people losing their homes, having to leave Las Vegas.
If I have to start over somewhere else, I have to start over.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now.
Go to the ends of the earth.
Right now.
We got something crazy.
And reach for the stars.
Here we are.
Time.
Yes, it's my comeback.
Hey, this is pretty fun. But wait, there's more.
Experience thought-provoking.
Welcome to the idea of being a human being.
Innovative and truly original reporting.
Look through a telescope and go, wow.
Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
Well, you are looking at Dallas, Texas, where the time now is 6:10. It is 7:10 here in New York City. CBS News Mornings is back with a look at some of the stories that you may have missed while you were offline. The U.S. has released the names of the Marines who died in a helicopter crash in northern Norway. All 4 service members were killed when their chopper went down Friday during NATO training exercises. Their bodies are expected back in the U.S. over the next few days. And at least 6 people are dead after a car traveling at a high speed smashed into a carnival crowd in Belgium yesterday. About 40 others were hurt, several of them hospitalized in serious condition. Police are investigating what they are calling a tragic accident. Rolling Stone reports that former White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows was involved in efforts to get Trump supporters to march on the Capitol on January 6th. A witness reportedly testified to House investigators about hearing administration officials and rally organizers discussing the plan on the phone. And new highly contagious COVID Omicron variant BA2 is driving up case numbers in parts of China and in Europe. U.S. health officials say Americans could also see an uptick in infections soon, but a huge surge is unlikely. Lilia Luciano reports.
States are turning the page on COVID from pandemic to endemic. The masks are off and many testing sites are shutting down. Most requirements are rolled back, except masking in airports and on public transportation, where it's mandatory for another month.
I'm glad to see we're opening up. Baby steps, of course, because we're still not sure what's happening.
New COVID infections in the U.S. are at their lowest level since last July, and nearly 99.5% of Americans are living in a low or medium risk area.
I think we're going to continue to see low levels of infection through the summer, but before we get there, we're probably going to see some tick up of infection like the Europeans are seeing right now.
Omicron subvariant BA2 is driving the surges in Europe, but health experts say vaccines are effective against the new strain. 82% of eligible Americans have received at least one dose. But in China, health officials say low vaccination rates among the elderly are behind the latest surge. The country just reported its first COVID deaths in more than a year. The U.S. Surgeon General says Americans should not panic about the outbreaks abroad, and many are confident as they return to newly opened workplaces.
For the most part, I feel safe.
Dr. Anthony Fauci says he expects cases of that Omicron subvariant to rise in the states, but that it'll be more of an uptick rather than a full-blown surge. Lilia Luciano, CBS News, Pasadena.
So back to the war in Ukraine. Despite relentless shelling and a rising number of casualties, the city of Mariupol is still defying a Russian call to surrender. Russia had set a deadline that expired today at 5 a.m. Moscow time. Meantime, an art school sheltering civilians was bombed over the weekend. Russian forces are advancing on other major cities, but the ground offensive is much slower than expected. Moscow is now resorting to more brutal tactics, including launching hypersonic missiles on military sites. On Face the Nation, Margaret Brennan asked the U.S. Secretary of Defense if that was a game changer.
I don't think that this in and of itself will be a game changer. You kind of question why he would do this. Is he running low on precision-guided munitions? Does he have like complete confidence in his ability to the ability of his troops to reestablish momentum?
Defense Secretary Austin did not confirm or dispute Russia's claims that it fired those missiles. President Biden is making his way to Brussels this week to sit down with NATO allies. He will also be stopping in Poland and meeting with the country's president to discuss the refugee crisis there. We want to bring in Ed O'Keefe now, who's following all of this for us. So, Ed, President Biden is making his way to Poland. He's going to be meeting with NATO allies about Ukraine, of course. Do we know what is on his agenda and if there are any plans for him to go, I don't know, to the border with Ukraine, or perhaps like some other world leaders we saw just last week actually meet with President Zelensky?
Well, good to see you, Anne-Marie. Happy Monday. Ahead of a busy week of diplomacy for this president, he is going to end up by the end of the week in Poland to meet with that country's president to thank them for absorbing the millions of Ukrainian refugees who have left their country, their neighboring country, and to really buoy a frontline NATO country that, of course, sits there on the border with Ukraine and is at risk of seeing the conflict escalate potentially. It is expected that there will be some kind of move or event held or visit made to meet with some of those Ukrainian refugees, or we shouldn't rule it out, let's say. But currently there are no plans to do so. The White House also made clear Sunday there are no plans currently for the president to visit Ukraine itself. You're referencing the fact that, for example, Secretary of State Antony Blinken crossed briefly across the border from Poland into Ukraine. Former Vice President Mike Pence did that on a similar visit recently. And there were some other Eastern European leaders who visited Kyiv by train last week in a show of defiance to the Russians. But there's no plan currently for the president to do that. At the meetings in Brussels, there will be a session, what NATO is calling an extraordinary summit. Officially, an extraordinary summit. Extraordinary in the sense that it was sort of called quite hastily, wasn't on the original NATO calendar this year, and it's designed to bring them all together to talk about the obvious urgent issue of what to do about the situation in Ukraine. He'll also hold a meeting while there with leaders of the G7 and meet with members of the European Commission as well. So a big chance for him to hold some in-person meetings with people he has spent plenty of time speaking to virtually in recent months about that crisis.
So speaking of another crucial meeting, President Biden and Chinese leader Xi Jinping spoke on Friday about Russia's invasion of Ukraine. China has been really sort of walking a bit of a tightrope throughout this whole thing, not overtly criticizing Russia and Vladimir Putin. In fact, prior to the Olympics, sort of standing side by side with Vladimir Putin, but also, expressing a desire to maybe help with the talks that might bring this to an end, or telling Ukraine that China would be willing to help finance the rebuilding of that country after this. So I'm wondering how that phone call went. The president has warned China, do not step in and support Russia in the way that there have been reports that Russia has been asking for.
Well, the good news out of that call, Anne-Marie, is that both leaders said they want their staffs or their aides to continue talking and to maintain an open line of communication. That, at the minimum, is all we can really expect and hope for. And that is certainly what is expected to happen. As for whether China will condemn what is going on, let's quote what the Chinese ambassador told our Margaret Brennan on Face the Nation yesterday. He said, don't be naive. Condemnation isn't necessarily going to end this situation. And he may have a point that while most of the world is against what Russia's doing, it's not like Putin's going to stop because everyone's telling him to. And so what China has signaled is that they support peace talks. They would like to see Russia and Ukraine resolve this, but they wouldn't give clear answers in that interview as to whether or not they're providing overt military support, other than to say that they're going to maintain relations. But the call on Friday, at least the official statements about it from both sides, signaled that they talked about the situation in Ukraine, that both sides perhaps have some work to do on trying to get to a peaceful resolution. And the Chinese also made a point of saying that they have been concerned with the interpretation of what is said in this country about Taiwan and whether or not China has any rights over that country. Apparently during the call, President Xi told President Biden, lay off that issue. We're going to resolve that one on our own, and we don't need the United States meddling in that situation. So that shows you where their head is at in terms of watching Russia deal with Ukraine. The Chinese have concerns that we see that situation in this country and think, well, if Russia can do that to Ukraine, China may do something to Taiwan. China's answer is, don't worry about that. That's none of your business, essentially, is what they, if you boil it down. But
Right.
either way, they're talking, and they've agreed to keep talking, and that is certainly a good sign.
Yeah, that's a little win if there's going to be any. Ed, thank you very much. So as we mentioned earlier, Justice Clarence Thomas has been hospitalized with an infection. That's according to the Supreme Court. He is expected to be released in the next couple of days, though. Today, confirmation hearings begin for Supreme Court nominee Ketanji Brown Jackson. If confirmed, she will be the first black woman to sit on the bench. Nicole Killian reports.
I'm pleased to nominate Judge Jackson.
Less than a month after President Biden nominated the first black woman to the Supreme Court, Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson will make one of the most important cases of her career to the Senate Judiciary Committee.
And if I'm fortunate enough to be confirmed as the next Associate Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States, I can only hope that my life and career will inspire future generations of Americans.
The Harvard Law graduate and mother of two currently sits on the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals. She has also been a district judge, public defender, and served on the U.S. Sentencing Commission.
Is this the last one this week, Judge?
Yes.
For weeks, Judge Jackson has made the rounds on Capitol Hill, meeting with 44 senators from both parties. She's also been participating in moot court sessions with White House staff.
She's gone back through her college career, her law school career. She has done all the due diligence on herself that these senators should be doing.
How is this one different?
Oh, it is different.
Illinois Senator Dick Durbin chairs the Judiciary Committee.
How much pressure do you feel to get this right?
I feel some. I'll be very honest with you. I want to do this in the right way. I also think the committee's not on trial, but the committee's being watched closely.
Republican Josh Hawley has signaled he wants to use the hearings to go after Jackson's sentencing record.
This is someone who has consistently let sex predators, child sex predators, off the hook.
This attack that we've seen over the last couple of days relies on factual inaccuracies and taking Judge Jackson's record wildly out of context.
In an exclusive interview on Face the Nation, Minority Leader Mitch McConnell said he hasn't made up his mind.
The committee will ask her all the tough questions. I haven't made a final decision as to how I'm going to vote.
All right, so Nicole Killian is joining us now. So, Nicole, things are going to get underway actually for a while, but we're going to actually see the process now publicly. What can we expect to hear from Judge Brown Jackson and from the committee members?
Well, I think it's a wait and see. A lot of their opening statements haven't been released, and we'll likely only get them perhaps right before the hearing. But certainly we do expect to hear a little bit more about Judge Jackson's judicial philosophy throughout the course of this hearing. That's certainly going to be a top line of questioning from lawmakers to get at where she comes down on some of the issues to the best of her ability. She probably won't try to prejudge any types of cases that could come before the court, and we've seen certainly in the past that many judicial nominees kind of try to stay away from that type of questioning. As far as senators too, it'll probably be a mix in terms of just really setting the stage for this historic process and what it means, the significance of these hearings. At least that's kind of what we expect in these opening rounds.
So, this is not the first time she's had to sit before the Senate for a confirmation hearing. I think it's the third for various positions. You'd think this would be sort of a no-brainer. They all know her. They know her record at this point. But I'm sure there will be critics. You already sort of suggested some of that in your package. So what is the expectation that she will be, that they will go after her for?
Yeah, well, I don't think it's necessarily a no-brainer from the standpoint. I mean, this is the Supreme Court. This is the highest court in the land. So this is an elevated position. Certainly, Judge Jackson has come before this committee before. She was just recently confirmed to the Circuit Court of Appeals as recently as last summer. She's been a district court judge, a public defender. She served on the U.S. Sentencing Commission. So to your point, she does have a wide breadth of experience and has been before some of these lawmakers before. But, it's a whole different ball game when you're talking about the Supreme Court. And so I think as far as Democrats are concerned, that's kind of been their line of argument. We know her. She has a record. And so what is there to question? But many Republicans feel that it is worth a deeper dive. Some of them have been critical of her record, whether that's on the Sentencing Commission, whether that's as a public defender. Again, as you heard Senator Hawley in the piece, his concerns, he's kind of trying to go after her as far as suggesting that she may be soft, for instance, on sex offenders. The White House claims that, he's just kind of cherry picking information from her record and not really presenting the full story. But, there are a number of questions that lawmakers have for her, and they'll get a chance to flesh that out over 2 days of question and answer rounds, which will start tomorrow.
And we will be watching. Nicole, thank you very much. So major efforts are underway to ease the pain at the pump. Coming up in our Money Watch segment, we'll take a closer look at what's fueling the high prices as big oil companies rake in billions of dollars in profits. And coming up later on Red and Blue, we'll have all the highlights from day one of Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson's Supreme Court nomination hearings. Retired U.S. District Judge Vanessa Gilmore joins us to discuss the latest developments. You can stream that conversation in our 6 p.m. Eastern hour. We'll be right back.
Breaking news as it happens. CBS News New York on the CBS News app and Pluto TV.
An original CBS Reports documentary.
Some Republicans are now accusing companies like Twitter and Facebook of targeting conservatives.
They've had unchecked power to censor.
I do not have access to my main Facebook account.
I wasn't given an explanation. I was just like, what did I do?
It's not okay to shut down my voice simply because it's not the same as yours.
How those rules are enforced is something that the rest of us know very, very little about.
The First Amendment protects all of us from the government limiting our speech. The companies have the ability to decide what speech they will allow. They're not the government.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now. An original CBS Reports documentary.
Oh my God, the truck is sinking.
Devastating flooding has reached catastrophic levels.
Rising sea levels are threatening America's coasts.
You would have to take that house and put it on stilts 10 feet tall. If the street is filled with salt water, what difference does it make how high you make your house?
The highest rental rates is exactly where the elevation is highest.
This was the evidence to prove that climate gentrification was real.
Pay $1,800 in 5 days or you have to leave. Were you scared?
Yes.
Every single person who stood up and said, I am not paying this rent increase, received an eviction.
Haitians built this place and you're getting kicked out.
Yes.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now.
We have an inspiring story that started with a strange act of kindness.
Yeah. We found it.
You're kidding me!
We share stories that lift you up and brighten your day.
The Uplift. Stream on the free CBS News app.
An original CBS Reports documentary.
The COVID economic shutdown hit Las Vegas harder than any other major city in the nation.
It's decimated the entertainment community.
So even though it looks fairly busy, this is really just a fraction of what business was like prior to COVID.
Last week, there was another large hotel chain that 18,000 were let go.
I haven't seen any jobs that are even close to what I was making.
We're trying to keep things as normal for our kids. I have a 16-year-old daughter and a 12-year-old son.
And I see every day people losing their homes, having to leave Las Vegas.
If I have to start over somewhere else, I have to start over.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now.
Well, welcome back, to CBS News Mornings. The time now is 7:29. Let's get you caught up on some of the news that you may have missed. The search intensifies for two suspects connected to a deadly weekend shooting in Dumas, Arkansas. At least one person was killed and dozens more injured after a fight erupted at a car show. The Supreme Court says 73-year-old Justice Clarence Thomas is expected to be released from the hospital soon after being admitted for an infection. And Thomas is expected to miss some oral arguments this week, but will be able to participate in cases by listening to transcripts. President Biden travels to Belgium this week for a high-stakes meeting with American allies. He'll also visit Poland as the country helps millions of Ukrainian refugees fleeing Russian attacks. As of right now, the president has no plans to visit Ukraine itself. So for more on all of this from the western city of Lviv, we want to bring in Michael Bosicki. He's a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council, and he joins us now with the latest. Thank you for joining us, first off. We've had some correspondence in Lviv, and it's always so striking that we often introduce the correspondence leading up to them with the latest attack on various cities in Ukraine, in some areas just outside of Lviv. And then you go to the images of Lviv and people are walking around, they're at parks. So I want to find out, what is it really like in Lviv right now? Because the tension must be rising.
Yeah, well, good to be with you again. Yeah, it's a split screen reality. On the one hand, you see those images that you described. I was walking around yesterday and you have families taking selfies and enjoying restaurants and things like that. But let there be no mistake. I mean, the anxiety and the tension here is very, very high, and for good reason. Lviv symbolically has great importance, especially in the Ukrainian, even the Russian psyche. This is the birthplace of Ukrainian nationalism. This is where a lot of the dissidents who were sent to the Soviet Gulag came from. This is where a lot of Ukraine's leaders in politics, economics, and business and literature come from. And finally, this is where a lot of diaspora trace their roots to, including the big Ukrainian diaspora in the United States. Even my own parents were born literally down the road from here. So, in that first speech where Mr. Putin talked about the gory kind of denazification of Ukraine, I think a lot of people here, their alarm bells went off in their heads thinking that he will at some point target Lviv. It just is a very, very important place throughout Ukrainian modern history.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. And we've seen how sort of the spirit and the history of Ukrainians has helped to drive them. And even though in some cases they may be sort of outmanned and outgunned, it is that spirit that has allowed them to keep Russia at bay for so long. That being said, it's looking dire in some cities. Mariupol is looking very, very bad. I was reading some segments from your blog, and people are desperate there. And there is also a concern, and I'm going to ask you, is there a concern that as the Russian sort of ground initiative seems to slow and is not as impactful, that Russia will up the ante and we'll see some very sort of, we'll see the battle get even harsher than it is already?
Yeah, absolutely. You nailed it with that description. You see what's happening right now with the Russians turning to very, very powerful long-range missiles. The Ukrainians are fighting back with that spirit that you explained, but it's like turning up to a gunfight with knives, right? You don't have much of a chance. And it's just horrible. I mean, I've worked in many, many complex emergencies, man-made and natural around the world. And what I'm reading out of Mariupol from colleagues today is absolutely terrifying. You're reading about people having to eat stray dogs just to survive. They were melting snow just for water, and now that snow is melting, a lot of the water there is contaminated from dead corpses. You couldn't, describe a worse situation. But what's happening in the kind of bigger picture is, yes, the Russians seem to be going to their playbook of encircling major cities like Kyiv, and there was fresh reports of shelling in Odessa today, pounding them into submission and either demanding that people swear loyalty to the Russians or driving them out. And you see, Anne-Marie, that's the other important thing that often gets overlooked here, those millions of Ukrainians fleeing beyond Ukraine's borders. That's Mr. Putin weaponizing migration. We're talking now figures of up to 10 million Ukrainians fleeing into neighboring countries. That's almost a quarter of the Ukrainian population, leading many people, if you add that plus the violence going on, attempt at genocide of the Ukrainian nation.
And then meanwhile, what we've seen on and off occurring are talks continuing. And in fact, President Zelensky says that he is, ready for negotiations. But do you think these talks have a hope of going anywhere?
Well, I think the latest is that Mr. Zelensky has requested for talks in Israel. But I can tell you from talking to ordinary people here the past few days, I haven't heard one person express optimism or support for these talks. I think the feeling is that the Russians, as they often do, will lay down concessions that no Ukrainian president could possibly agree to. And also, even if there was some kind of agreement on the Russian side, as we've seen over the past 8 years in Donetsk and Luhansk, they tend not to honor their ceasefire agreements. With Mr. Zelensky, if he does enter into peace talks, he will have to decide where to draw the line in terms of territory, whether to go, well, we're now a month into the war, whether to go a month backwards or all the way back into 2014 and regain Crimea, Donetsk, and Luhansk. So extremely, extremely sensitive talks coming up if they happen at all.
Yeah. Michael Boscu, thank you so much for talking to us. Please stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
So we are taking a closer look at what exactly is driving up gas prices. Turns out it's more than just Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Coming up after the break, we're going to have more on the global oil supply and why energy prices are soaring worldwide. And a reminder that tomorrow morning, Here Comes the Sun streams at 6:30 Eastern. Our weekly show is anchored by Tracy Smith and Lee Cowan and takes a closer look at the people, places, and things featured every weekend on Sunday morning. You can also stream it on demand on the CBS News app. We'll be right back.
CBS News Los Angeles, powered by KCAL 9. Breaking news and weather live as it happens. Streaming on the CBS News app and on Pluto TV.
An original CBS Reports documentary.
Some Republicans are now accusing companies like Twitter and Facebook of targeting conservatives.
They've had unchecked power to censor.
I do not have access to my main Facebook account.
I wasn't given an explanation. I was just like, what did I do?
It's not okay to shut down my voice simply because it's not the same as yours.
How those rules are enforced is something that the rest of us know very, very little about.
The First Amendment protects all of us from the government limiting our speech. The companies have the ability to decide what speech they will allow. They're not the government.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now. An original CBS Reports documentary.
Oh my God, the truck is sinking.
Devastating flooding has reached catastrophic levels.
Rising sea levels are threatening America's coasts.
You would have to take that house and put it on stilts 10 feet tall. If the street is filled with salt water, what difference does it make how high you make your house?
The highest rental rates is exactly where the elevation is highest.
This was the evidence to prove that climate gentrification was real.
Pay $1,800 in 5 days or you have to leave. Were you scared?
Yes.
Every single person who stood up and said, I am not paying this rent increase, received an eviction.
Haitians built this place and you're getting kicked out.
Yes.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now.
We have an inspiring story that started with a strange act of kindness.
Yes. We found it.
You're kidding me!
We share stories that lift you up and brighten your day.
The Uplift. Stream on the free CBS News app.
An original CBS Reports documentary.
The COVID economic shutdown hit Las Vegas harder than any other major city in the nation.
It's decimated the entertainment community.
So even though it looks fairly busy, this is really just a fraction of what business was like prior to COVID.
Last week, there was another large hotel chain that 18,000 were let go.
I haven't seen any jobs that are even close to what I was making.
We're trying to keep things as normal for our kids. I have a 16-year-old daughter and a 12-year-old son.
and I see every day people losing their homes, having to leave Las Vegas.
If I have to start over somewhere else, I have to start over.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now.
Firefighters are working to contain several wildfires ravaging parts of Texas and Oklahoma. So for more on what firefighters are facing on the ground as they try to get a handle on the fires, I want to bring in the Weather Channel's meteorologist Jim Cantori from their global headquarters in Atlanta. Jim, thank you so much for joining us. We don't have Jim. Okay, so hopefully we'll get Jim in a little bit. We can talk a little bit more about those fires in Texas. Disney CEO Bob Chapek is speaking out against Florida's recent so-called Don't Say Gay bill that limits what teachers can say about sexuality or gender. Critics initially called out the CEO for his silence. DeSantis' signing of the bill into law, the Republican governor slammed the CEO as, quote, woke. 7 people have been charged in an armed robbery that happened on the set of Lupin, the popular heist TV series on Netflix. Authorities say 20 hooded thieves attacked the set by launching fireworks. They allegedly stole more than $300,000 worth of equipment. Wow. And China is reportedly producing new billionaires at a faster rate than any other country in the world. According to a new report, there are more than 1,100 known billionaires in China compared to just over 700 in the U.S. The report also says China's billionaire population is growing 3 times faster than America. All right, so on to the war, back to the war in Ukraine now. It has fueled a crisis at America's gas stations, and the White House is facing growing calls to intervene. David Pogue explains what's behind the pain at the pump.
Last week, average American gas prices hit a record high, $4.33 a gallon, and much higher in some places. And because it now costs more to transport anything, everything costs more. So why are gas prices spiking? It's got to be Russia, right?
No, the problem with energy prices is not just Russia.
Jason Bordoff is the director of the Center on Global Energy Policy at Columbia University. And, by the way, an electric bike fan. He says that it all started with the pandemic.
We shut down half the global economy to keep people at home and keep us safe. And so prices collapsed, and you had incentive to stop drilling and lay down your rigs.
Okay, so demand for oil fell, and then the supply fell. And then, when the pandemic began to ease up,
people have more money to spend, and a lot of them are spending it on pent-up demand for travel. We haven't traveled in a while, and people really want to do that. And the oil industry is trying to ramp production back up. But like supply chains with cars and supply chains with lots of other parts of our economy, there are bottlenecks and problems.
So the oil companies were trying to gear up again. But then Russia attacked Ukraine. All over the world, countries stopped buying Russian oil.
Much less Russian oil is getting out into the world. And therefore, there's less oil in the global bathtub of oil, and that pushes prices up for that global oil price.
So the pandemic recovery was the first whammy, and the Russia situation made it a double whammy. Too much demand, not nearly enough supply. But we get only about 3% of our oil from Russia. So why does that war affect prices here? Well, without the Russian oil, the countries that usually buy Russian oil had to find other sources. So less oil overall, prices go up, including here.
Well, the U.S. housing crisis is taking a major toll on renters across the country. Prices soared to new levels last year amid rising inflation. Coming up, 60 Minutes takes a closer look at why monthly payments are skyrocketing. Until then, we are going to take a quick break, which means you have 3 minutes to download the CBS News app. It's free. You can do it on all your devices. Our app gives you the best of CBS News all in one place. And while you're at it, why don't you check out Paramount Plus? We've got a mountain of content for you to stream there, including your favorite shows, movies, and sports. We'll be right back.
When these Holocaust survivors are gone, who will warn us to never forget? When some people don't know. Undeniable. The Truth to Remember. Streaming now.
An original CBS Reports documentary.
Some Republicans are now accusing companies like Twitter and Facebook of targeting conservatives.
They've had unchecked power to censor.
I do not have access to my main Facebook account.
I wasn't given an explanation. I was just like, what did I do?
It's not okay to shut down my voice simply because it's not the same as yours.
How those rules are enforced is something that the rest of us know very, very little about.
The First Amendment protects all of us from the government limiting our speech. The companies have the ability to decide what speech they will allow. They're not the government.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now. An original CBS Reports documentary.
Oh my God, the truck is sinking.
Devastating flooding has reached catastrophic levels.
Rising sea levels are threatening America's coasts.
You would have to take that house and put it on stilts 10 feet tall. If the street is filled with salt water, what difference does it make how high you make your house?
The highest rental rates is exactly where the elevation is highest.
This was the evidence to prove that climate gentrification was real.
Pay $1,800 in 5 days or you have to leave. Were you scared?
Yes.
Every single person who stood up and said, I am not paying this rent increase, received an eviction.
Haitians built this place and you're getting kicked out.
Yes.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now.
We have an inspiring story that started with a strange act of kindness.
Yes.
We found it.
You're kidding me?
We share stories that lift you up and brighten your day.
The Uplift. Stream on the free CBS News app.
An original CBS Reports documentary.
The COVID economic shutdown hit Las Vegas harder than any other major city in the nation.
It's decimated the entertainment community.
So even though it looks fairly busy, this is really just a fraction of what business was like prior to COVID.
Last week, there was another large hotel chain that 18,000 were let go.
I haven't seen any jobs that are even close to what I was making.
We're trying to keep things as normal for our kids. I have a 16-year-old daughter and a 12-year-old son.
And I see every day people losing their homes, having to leave Las Vegas.
If I have to start over somewhere else, I'll have to start over.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now. An original CBS Reports documentary.
50 shows running, the lights blinking.
People fight their entire career to get to Broadway.
You've trained your entire life.
Spotlights, drama, passion.
This is what we live for.
Until COVID turned off the lights.
It's like going from a bright light to pitch black.
Scenes from Broadway's unique struggle with COVID.
It was devastating.
Broadway contributes about $15 billion to New York City's economy and 100,000 jobs.
The sound team, the lighting team, everyone.
The world does not realize how big this is.
This is how we make money.
This is a specialized industry. You don't tell a doctor to go get a serving job. You just, why are we different?
Are we going to be able to pay our rent? Am I going to have food?
What will happen in Broadway's new opening act?
We're in uncharted waters again.
The show must go on.
There is reason to hope again.
I think people are going to be crying. I know I will.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now.
Well, as we told you a little earlier, firefighters are working to contain several wildfires ravaging parts of Texas, and Oklahoma. So for more on what firefighters are facing on the ground, we want to bring in the Weather Channel's meteorologist, Jim Cantori. You are at the global headquarters in Atlanta. Jim, what's fueling the flames, and is there any relief on the way for these firefighters?
So the same storm system that's going to bring us severe weather over the next several days is fueling the flames, but there is some relief before this thing passes on by. Let's talk about it. It's going to be brief, Anne-Marie, and here's the problem. We got strong southeast winds today coming into western Texas, all right? They'll be shifting through the day. So we moisten, then we dry and change the winds. They're already at 30 miles per hour, unfortunately, here. As we look at rainfall for the next couple of days, guess where the heaviest rain is going to be? Away from the fires. All those little fire icons you see right there are all 100 acres or greater. Unfortunately, more wind, more lightning, and not as much rain as we'd like on these fires.
And then it's not just fires threatening parts of the southern plains. There's also potential for a dangerous severe weather outbreak. What do we need to know about that? What do they need to watch out for?
Yeah, so the same storm that's been fueling these fires is also going to be responsible for a big severe weather outbreak. So look behind me here. You can see we've pretty much got 3 days worth of severe weather. We're talking about all hazards in play here. Tornadoes, big hail, damaging winds as we go from the southern plains through the Mississippi Valley all the way to the East Coast. So let's get into this here for you. We like to look at our tornado potential with a number from 0 to 10. 0 is obviously no potential. 10 is like off the charts. 5 is halfway there. So that's pretty big. And we're talking about Dallas, Waco, Texas, College Station. We'll see a line of thunderstorms start to develop this afternoon, probably right around dinner time. Waco, Austin. This will push east as we go through the overnight hours, start to weaken a little bit, but then comes another little piece of energy that actually helps this thing jack up overnight. So 4 a.m., Shreveport all the way down to the areas west of Houston are in play for these same risks. And then we'll watch the whole thing just keep on moving during the day, where our Torcon numbers are now 7 out of 10 chance. We actually see better parameters coming up tomorrow for these severe storms. And again, all hazards in play. They start to weaken a little bit on Thursday, but we'll still be dealing with severe weather, potentially in the morning, Alabama, Florida, and then developing up through eastern North Carolina and Virginia as we go on through the day. So we got a busy 3 days coming up and through here. A little bit of moisture for Texas, but unfortunately, we go right back to the dry, windy conditions after a brief break in that today. Anne-Marie, you can catch live coverage of the severe threat all day on the Weather Channel television network. You know we're going to keep everybody covered here.
Oh, I know you will, Jim. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
The time now is 7:50, and this is a live look at New York's Times Square, home of CBS Mornings. Nate Burleson is standing by with a preview of the show. Nate, good morning.
Good morning, Anne-Marie. Ahead on CBS Mornings, the latest from Ukraine, including a look at how surrogate babies are being stranded by the war. Charlie D'Agata follows exhausted nurses and doctors taking care of the most vulnerable. Also, if gas prices have got you down, Chris Van Cleve goes behind the wheel with an expert who has tricks that you can use today that could save you some money. And in our continuing series, Kindness 101, Steve Hartman introduces us to a young superhero in a cape, giving hope to the homeless. We'll have all of that and more. We'll see you at 8.
See you at 8. Thank you so much. Well, the cost of rent has increased dramatically across the U.S. over the last year. In this week's 60 Minutes, Leslie Stahl spoke with Redfin's chief economist to figure out just what's driving the surge.
It's pretty much universally true. Rents are going up all around the country, but it's even more severe in migration destinations like the Sun Belt of the country, Austin, Phoenix, Florida. A lot of people are moving there, and there's just more demand for rents.
Daryl Fairweather is the chief economist at Redfin, a nationwide real estate brokerage firm that pulls together real-time statistics on both the sales and rental markets. For example, their numbers show that rents increased 31% in Jacksonville last year, 40% in Austin, Texas.
What's causing this? We are not building enough housing for everybody who needs a place to live. We built fewer homes in the 2010s than in any decade going back to the 1960s. And at the same time, millennials are the biggest generation and they're entering into home buying age. Millennials aren't living in their parents' basement anymore or shacking up with roommates. They want a place of their own. And we didn't build any housing for them in the last decade because we are still so traumatized by the last housing crisis. We didn't put any investment into housing.
In the economic crisis of 2008 and 9, construction of new housing came to a grinding halt. But even when the economy recovered, home construction didn't.
So how big is the rental shortage in the United States?
The government has estimated that we are short about 4 million homes in this country, and that number is likely growing, especially since the pandemic.
4 million shy.
Yes. That's the hole that we're in that we need to build ourselves out of.
That number, 4 million, is that mainly in the South and Southwest, or does that include New York City and San Francisco?
That's the entire country.
With something as essential as housing in such short supply, you'd have to figure that Wall Street would see an opportunity, buying modest single-family houses, the kind you'd see on any middle-class suburban street, and then renting them out.
In places like Jacksonville, Atlanta, Charlotte, investors are buying almost 30% of the homes that are available for regular home buyers.
So you can stream the full 60 Minutes episode tomorrow night at 8 Eastern. You can also check it out on demand on Paramount Plus. The time now is 7:54. Here's a look at what's coming up today. Senate confirmation hearings for Supreme Court Justice nominee Ketanji Brown Jackson are set to begin in just a few hours. Judiciary Committee members will make statements before introducing the nominee, and you can stream the historic proceedings at 11 a.m. Eastern. And President Biden is expected to discuss the Ukraine war with leaders from France, Germany, Italy, and the UK later on this morning. They're set to highlight their coordinated response to Russia's invasion ahead of high-stakes NATO meetings this week. Plus, later on today, the president will also discuss the conflict with top business leaders during their quarterly meeting. The White House says that he's also expected to address the administration's plans to create more jobs, tackle climate change, and lower costs for families. And before all of that, the January 6th committee has intensified its investigation into the Capitol attack. So coming up at our 9 o'clock hour, we're going to have new details on lawmakers' strategy and former chief of staff, Mark Meadows. If you're heading out the door, take us with you. You can access all of our CBS News national and local streams for free, anytime, anywhere on the CBS News app. CBS Mornings is next. I will see you in an hour.
An original CBS Reports documentary.
Some Republicans are now accusing companies like Twitter and Facebook of targeting conservatives.
They've had unchecked power to censor.
I do not have access to my main Facebook account. I wasn't given an explanation. I was just like, what did I do?
It's not okay to shut down my voice simply because it's not the same as yours.
How those rules are enforced is something that the rest of us know very, very little about.
The First Amendment protects all of us from the government limiting our speech. The companies have the ability to decide what speech they will allow. They're not the government.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now. An original CBS Reports documentary.
Oh my God, the truck is sinking.
Devastating flooding has reached catastrophic levels.
Rising sea levels are threatening America's coasts.
You would have to take that house and put it on stilts 10 feet tall. If the street is filled with salt water, what difference does it make how high you make your house?
The highest rental rates is exactly where the elevation is highest.
This was the evidence to prove that carbon gentrification was real.
Pay $1,800 in 5 days or you have to leave. Were you scared?
Yes.
Every single person who stood up and said, I am not paying this rent increase, received an eviction.
Haitians built this place and you're getting kicked out.
Yes.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now.
We have an inspiring story that started with a strange act of kindness.
Yes.
We found it.
You're kidding me!
We share stories that lift you up and brighten your day.
The Uplift. Stream on the free CBS News app.
An original CBS Reports documentary.
The COVID economic shutdown hit Las Vegas harder than any other major city in the nation.
It's decimated the entertainment community.
So even though it looks fairly busy, this is really just a fraction of what business was like prior to COVID.
Last week, there was another large hotel chain that 18,000 were let go.
I haven't seen any jobs that are even close to what I was making.
We're trying to keep things as normal for our kids. I have a 16-year-old daughter and a 12-year-old son.
And I see every day people losing their homes, having to leave Las Vegas.
If I have to start over somewhere else, I have to start over.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now.
I still see her waving at me from the bus. And that was the last time I ever saw my mother.
They took out my mother's brother and they shot him.
I'm Juliana Margulies. When these Holocaust survivors are gone, who will warn us?